You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. And be sure to smash that like button. LSU and USC are going to open up the season out in Vegas a week from Sunday. Excited about that. Ryan Kartje covers the Trojans for the LA Times. Good enough to join us for a couple of minutes here. Good to talk again, Ryan. Thanks for the time, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Hey, I saw your tweet with the Lincoln Riley quote about NIL. I'll read it for our audience. Said, where USC stood on NIL at the start, quote, "You don't want to go into a gunfight with a knife. In the beginning, we were going to a gunfight with a toy sword." How much has that changed from the beginning to now? And assuming that number has gone up, how much expectation and pressure ratchets up on Lincoln Riley this year?
Well, first off, just NIL-wise, I think Lincoln is right when he says, when he characterizes the situation that he stepped into NIL-wise. It was, among the most poor of any blue blood program in the country, and a lot of that had to do with the previous leadership at the university and in the athletic department. But, going forward, it's kind of hard to quantify completely without seeing the numbers, without knowing how many guys have said yes, how many guys have said no, specifically because of NIL. But it's pretty clear that it has improved. The question is just whether it's improved to the level that USC needs it to be to match up with, the Michigans, the Ohio States, the top of the top in the Big Ten. In terms of Lincoln Riley, I certainly think he's facing, the most important season he's had at USC yet. Not only for reasons of NIL and attracting players to come here, but at this point he just needs to make a good impression in this new conference. And the excuses have kind of run out on the defensive end. So, he was able to run a defensive coordinator search himself, really took their time, interviewed a lot of people, and settled on Danton Lynn from UCLA. And, at this point, there's a lot riding on that hire. I think they're going to be patient, but at the same time, they need to show some sort of improvement. That's not to say that Lincoln is on the hot seat by any means. I think even just financially, that's probably impossible at this point. But I think the hot seat could turn up pretty hot if things weren't to go as they hoped this season.
So obviously defensive improvement is a giant part of that, as you noted. And it's so interesting because we're having the same conversations here around Brian Kelly and LSU with the defense after they were so bad a year ago. Best you can tell through 3 weeks of fall camp, how much better are they?
Again, that's a tough thing to quantify when we see such little of practice itself, but it really does seem like at least the secondary, even just by sheer numbers and, past tape of guys who have transferred into the program, you have to think that group is going to be better. It's at least deeper. So, I think we'll see some pretty massive improvement there. Now, the question is the defensive line. There's not a ton of depth there, and they don't necessarily have someone with the talent to match Bear Alexander, who was great in last year's defense, albeit inconsistent. But, if a few people can step up in the linebacking core on the defensive line, I think you are going to see a pretty massive improvement. Now, does that make this, any better than an average defense? I don't know if that's possible, just given how low it was a year ago. But, even just an average defense when paired with a standard Lincoln Riley offense, you're talking about, being in the playoff conversation.
It's just so interesting to hear. I mean, Ryan, I've said this so much to our audience. You could have a conversation about LSU or USC, and you could just redact the team names or the players' names, and it sounds like you're having the same it would be indiscernible which team you're discussing. So,
and we haven't even brought up the quarterback position.
We're going to get there.
We're going to get it's frightening similarity.
I mean, down to the fact that they're both 6'2", 200 pounds, signed in the class of 2021 as 4 stars, sat for 3 years behind a Heisman winner, started the bowl game. I mean, it's like the same thing, which makes this fascinating. But on defense, where would you say, what level of the defense are they maybe most convinced that they're better, and where maybe does the biggest question linger defensively?
I think it's pretty well accepted within the building that the secondary is going to be significantly better. But I also think that was probably the area that, was at its best last year as well when compared to the others. So I do think we're going to see some improvement there. And, you're probably going to face maybe not as dynamic a quarterbacks in the Big Ten. That is one thing that is a little different than the Pac-12. But that said, I think, Dan Lynn actually said today he thinks the defensive line is deeper at USC than it was for him at UCLA. I don't know about that, just in my opinion. Now, maybe some of these young defensive linemen step up, but I do think there's the most questions swirling around that. And ultimately, that's really going to be tested by a conference like the Big Ten or a team like LSU.
He's Ryan Kartje on Twitter at Ryan_Kartje, Kartje, covers USC for the LA Times if you want to give him a follow, getting closer to LSU and Southern Cal. So if you flip it around, we're talking about Garrett Nussmeier. You all are talking about Miller Moss. I think the answer that you give is going to be almost identical to what we'd say about Nussmeier, but how are the collective feeling there about Miller Moss entering his second career start, but obviously his first opener to start?
Yeah, it's kind of been a foregone conclusion that he would be the quarterback just after that 6-touchdown Holiday Bowl performance back in December. So I don't think anyone's surprised by that. It was interesting to see that, Lincoln Riley made a point of saying how close the quarterback competition was with UNLV transfer Jaden Mayava, and I know for a fact that they've been pleased with his progress. So it is interesting to see Riley compare the two of them, but I think with Miller Moss, you're getting a guy who's been in the system for a long time. And, sometimes with Riley's system, it takes a minute for all of that to click. So I do think just that experience and the poise that he brings to the position is going to be a huge asset. Now, he's not Caleb Williams at all. Very different skill set. So I think the offense, in turn is going to look a lot different. I think we might see the ball out faster. We might see more timing-based stuff. And, a little bit less focus on extending plays. So that will just change the general tenor of the offense. And, we haven't completely seen what that's going to look like. But, I do think, as a caretaker type who can have some big games like he did in the Holiday Bowl, Miller Moss is definitely going to be a capable quarterback in the Big Ten, and in the Big Ten, that might actually make you a top 5 in-conference quarterback.
That's very, very true with the traditional style of play, but we'll see if there's any evolution there as well. What about the skill players there at SC? Are there new names this year through camp that, if you're an LSU fan going into the game a week from Sunday, that you should know?
There are, actually. There's especially in the receiver room, there's a lot of exciting players who, started to break out towards the end of last year and now have really taken the step forward. Obviously, everyone knows Zachariah Branch, but I think, he'll certainly build for a bigger role and to take a leap, as a more complete receiver, which will be fascinating to watch. But one guy I'm really watching closely is Jacoby Lane. You're talking about a 6'4" outside receiver, who does great on jump balls and, is really a red zone threat in a way that USC hasn't had probably since Drake London. So I think he, could ultimately be someone who finishes with double-digit touchdowns this year in a breakout season. Would not be surprised. And then there's Mekhi Lemon, another, more of a slot type, can also play outside, but will certainly get a ton of catches. Has the trust of Miller Moss. All three of those guys, are sophomores who I think are kind of ready to take that second-year leap. And, on the more experienced level, people haven't really been talking about Woody Marks, the transfer running back from Mississippi State. But, he was on NFL radars coming out of Mississippi State last season, decided to transfer to Lincoln Riley's offense. And it's kind of a perfect fit as, this very versatile all-purpose pass-catching back. And I think, especially when you're talking about Miller Moss, getting rid of the ball quickly, making smart decisions, being able to throw to a guy like that who can make contested catches and also do a lot of damage in space, he could end up being a very dangerous weapon this season.
Ryan, no seldom do people ever talk about special teams. Here, it was so good for so many years, but the last 2 years it's been very bad. And to the point where it actually cost LSU the Florida State game in New Orleans a couple of years ago when they had a PAT blocked and they muffed a couple of punts, and it's been bad. How are the Trojans in the third phase?
Well, so this is actually the first season ever that Lincoln Riley will have a special teams coordinator, an official one.
Okay.
That's kind of been a point of consternation among fans a little bit since he came on board. I don't really think that's going to make much of a difference. He's basically had a special teams coordinator, just not an actual title in Ryan Doherty. But the real question, I think, is the kicking game. Last year was very inconsistent. We don't know yet who the starting kicker is going to be. Presumably will be Michael Lance, the transfer from Georgia Southern, who was brought in. But that could, they left a lot of points on the board last year by missed makeable kicks. So I think that'll make a big difference. But then you talk about a guy like Zachariah Branch, who was a freshman All-American as a punt returner last year, having another season. He's already the best punt returner in college football. So, you could certainly get some vibes of the Reggie Bush days on punt returns, at least. But USC has the ability to do some damage on special teams, but the kicking game is definitely still a question mark.
Yeah. It's just so, Xavion Thomas was a freshman All-America returner at Mississippi State who transferred to LSU. So now you get former freshman All-America returners. I mean, Ryan, isn't this so bizarre? Just the eerie similarities with these two teams. It's very difficult to find the spot on either roster where you go, okay, there's the major difference. There's the spot where this team is decidedly better or decidedly worse. Do you have any answer to that?
I don't, and it's eerie. I'll take it even to another level. I mean, these teams haven't played in a long time, but the last time they were sort of pinned to get against each other in the public eye, was 20 years ago when they were both also named national champions. So they have a lot in common for sure. I do think I would be curious, if LSU fans feel the same way about Brian Kelly that they seem to feel about Lincoln Riley, but it's an interesting mixed bag of feelings, I think, at this point after a few years.
Maybe a difference there that Kelly's on pretty solid ground here. But the expectation is championships, and that breakthrough has got to come. We'll see if maybe it comes this year for either one of these teams. Ryan Kartje, LA Times. We appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, anytime.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.